Hi guys, it's Mark Zicree, Mr. Sci-Fi, also Mark Zicree of Space Command, and many other things. So I am here in Hay-on-Wye, which is in Wales, and it is a bookstore town, a town made up principally of many, many, many cool bookstores. We've been here for a few days, and in addition to meeting with some kids and teenagers and advising them on how to have a career as writers and directors and so forth, we also have been going to bookstores and so forth. So let me show you some of the book haul. This is not all of it. I've mailed most of it back to LA, so we'd have to lug it through back to London. But I think I'll share some of these things with you. So let's see what I can do. Well, first of all, this is a T-shirt that I bought. Now, again, the town is called Hay-on-Wye, and so this is a pun. This shirt says, let's see if I can get it on camera. Let's see. It says, I'll tell you what it says on the bottom. It says, "Hey, take a walk on the Y side." So that's a, satire on, take a walk on the wild side, but it's, "Hey, take a walk on the Y side." So I'm going to be wearing that proudly. Here's another book that I got, which is Security by Ariel Dorfman. And this is a signed limited edition. There's the signature. He is a Chilean writer who at one point was imprisoned by the junta. But the reason I got this particularly was because he was one of my teachers at UCLA. He was, at that time, he was espousing that the Disney comic books with, Scrooge McDuck, etc., were propaganda being used against the people of Central and South America. It seemed like a little bit extreme. I don't think that was the intent, but it might have been the result. So, and Disney wasn't letting him publish this work, so they were publishing it in an alternative newspaper at the time. But I thought it was really fun to get a signed book. It's a short story of his, and I'm reading it and enjoying it. So let's see what else we got. Okay, this is The Voice of the Dolphins by Leo Szilard. And I've never seen this book before, but the reason I got it was Leo Szilard was one of the scientists at the Manhattan Project that created the atom bomb. And this is a collection of short stories he wrote. And it's very interesting because one story, the title story, Voice of the Dolphins, is a history of the world from 1963. This book came out before 1963 to 1985, telling how American and Russian scientists conspired to save the world from thermonuclear war through the medium of an institute devoted to the study of dolphins. By the way, it's nuclear, not nuclear, as so many people are saying it. It's appalling to me that even experts who should know better are saying nuclear. It's nuclear, guys. It has one U in it. But another story he has in here is My Trial as a War Criminal, which puts American statesmen and scientists on trial for their decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima. So this is one of those scientists writing a story in which he and his colleagues are put on trial. Then this is another book I got. It's a British edition of Brad Lineweaver's Moon of Ice, which is an alternate history where the Nazis won, and they have a space program. And he actually got blurbs from Ray Bradbury and Isaac Asimov, which is pretty cool. I know Brad, and he's a libertarian, so that's throughout this book. But it's got a cool, cover with Nazis on the moon or whatever, and so I've started reading it. And let's see what else we have in here. Lots of cool stuff. Let's see. So from today, this is some of the haul from today. This is Penguin paperback, H.G. Wells' The War in the Air. Now, around 1900 or so, H.G. Wells wrote a book positing war in the air with airplanes. And this is just after the Wright brothers flew their first planes. So it was very, very, very ahead of its time. And so he also writes an introduction in the 1920s after World War I, and then in the 1940s during World War II, talking about how his predictions had come true. And of course, he was the great author of The Time Machine and Island of Dr Moro and War of the Worlds, and one of my favorite movies, Things to Come, which we'll get to in a moment, and which you can watch in its entirety on Mr. Sci-Fi. Also, by the way, Mr. Sci-Fi has been demonetized by YouTube, so if anyone wants to help me get it remonetized, that would be much, much, much appreciated. But and then there was this other H.G. Wells book, The Island of Dr. Moro, which is about a scientist who makes beasts into men or man-like creatures, and it had this really cool illustration on it. So there's the book, and it's a very good but very dark story, and it was made into an excellent film in the 30s called Island of Lost Souls, starring Charles Laughton as Dr. Moreau and Bela Lugosi as one of the beast men, one of the animal men. And it's a great film. If you've never seen it, Island of Lost Souls, I think it's available on Criterion, and you can definitely hunt it down. And then, of course, we found this cute dog card, so we got this. And there's dogs all over the town, people with their dogs on leash, and it's very dog-friendly here. So let me show you some other things that are very cool. This is the 50th anniversary edition of Slaughterhouse-Five, and it's one of my favorite novels, and by Kurt Vonnegut, and it has a long, long section on how he struggled to come up with the book and wrote many drafts of it, and interviews with him about this book, and the firebombing of Dresden, and appreciations by other writers. And so, very, very cool. Now, if you've never read Vonnegut, I highly recommend him. He's one of my favorite writers. But it's funny because he is not viewed as a science fiction writer, but many of his books are science fiction and his short stories as well. So, for instance, Slaughterhouse-Five has aliens in it. It's got alien planets. It's got time travel. So, I mean, the opening line is, "Listen, Billy Pilgrim has come unstuck in time," one of the great opening lines. And so Slaughterhouse-Five is science fiction. Cat's Cradle, another one of his novels, is science fiction. Sirens of Titan is science fiction. Timequake is science fiction. He wrote other novels that weren't, but he was very, very, very determined to be viewed as a mainstream writer, not a science fiction writer. Partially, the reason for that is because science fiction writers generally got paid very poorly, whereas if you could get, and were not generally reviewed by the mainstream press, whereas mainstream quote-unquote writers were. So Vonnegut very carefully chose who he wanted to be viewed as, what he wanted to be viewed as. He also created a science fiction writer character named Kilgore Trout, who was sort of the perennial loser writer, living a life of poverty, writing short stories that were of science fiction short stories that were appearing in men's magazines and so forth. And that was based on Theodore Sturgeon, who he met years earlier when Sturgeon was living in the same town that he was. And he finally admitted that it was based on Theodore Sturgeon. Theodore, Kilgore, Sturgeon, trout, different fish, and but it's not a one-for-one portrait of Ted Sturgeon. It's also, you know, Vonnegut's views of, you know, the life of poverty when he was starting out as a writer and so forth. And it also allowed him to summarize science fiction stories and novels that he wasn't going to write, but that were funny when they were just, you know, presented in brief. So that's Slaughterhouse-Five. This is Letter from New York by Helene Hanff. And I've never seen this book before, but it turns out Helene Hanff wrote a wonderful book called 84 Charing Cross Road. And it was a series of letters, real-life letters, between her and a book dealer in London after World War II. And it was made into a play and then into a wonderful movie with Anthony Hopkins and Anne Bancroft, produced by Mel Brooks, her husband. And if you've never read the book or seen the movie, I highly recommend them. And all of us who love books love stories about books and about book readers and book dealers. And it's a wonderful piece of work, and I highly recommend it. But I didn't know about this book because apparently in the early 90s, Helene Hanff was hired by the BBC to do a series of letters from New York, you know, these oral reports from New York over the course of a year, month by month. And this is the book that puts it all together. And it also has an introduction by her younger cousin. And she's a very readable and very entertaining writer, and with a very strong voice. And so I look forward to reading that. Now let's see, what also do we have in here? What other books do we have? Tons. Okay, now I went to the science fiction section of certain stores, and sometimes I buy British editions of books that I have, and other times I buy books I've never seen before. And so let me show you some of these things. Pretty cool. So this is Captives of the Flame by Samuel R. Delany. I've never seen this book. It's got a really cool Jack Gauguin cover, and then it's an ace double. So on the other side is this thing. This thing with, it looks like an Ed Emshwiller cover to me, but it's the psionic menace, Keith Woodcott. But the Samuel R. Delany thing is interesting because, of course, Chip Delany, Samuel R. Delany, is one of the great writers of science fiction and mainstream literature, too. And he was one of my teachers at Clarion when I was 19, and I've been corresponding with him recently, and he'll be signing some of my books that I've mailed to him, but not this one, because here it is in my hand. So... Here's another ace double. These are books, a lot of the books I'm buying are books from the 50s, because that's my favorite period of science fiction, the 50s and early 60s. So this is another ace double, Earthman Go Home by Poul Anderson, and on the other side, To the Tombaugh Station by Wilson Tucker. And these are great covers by one of my favorite science fiction artists, Ed M. Schwiller. It's just really fun. And this is a book by Clifford Simak, who's quite a good science fiction writer if you've never heard of him. This is Time is the Simplest Thing. And I've never read this book, but it seems like it'll be really fun to read. This is the British edition, the Pan paperback of it. Then I saw this. I'd never heard of this before, but I liked the cover, so I got it. The Big X by Hank Searles. And it's on the back it says, the Big X was heading into space with death as the co-pilot. Sounds pretty good to me. Then also this is the Chrysalids, a Penguin paperback. This is, most science fiction writers wrote after the bomb stories, what happens to society after a nuclear war. Both mainstream writers and science fiction writers did that. I love On the Beach by Neville Shute. It's one of the great ones. The Chrysalids is John Wyndham's famous version. That's John Wyndham. I like the fact that some of these Penguin books have the photos of the author on the back. In many cases, I haven't seen photos of the author, so I don't know what they look like. I did know what John Wyndham looked like. If you've never read John Wyndham, he's one of the great writers of science fiction. I highly recommend Day of the Triffids and The Midwich Cuckoos and The Chrysalids and Chalky. And my favorite probably is The Kraken Wakes. All of them are well worth reading. Let's see what else do I have in here. Let's see. Okay, this little nondescript book is a very early edition from probably around the early 1900s of First Men in the Moon by H.G. Wells, and it has this nice illustration of Professor Cavor, and it reads, "It seems to be deserted," said Cavor, "absolutely desolate." And again, this is one of the great works of science fiction. If you've never read it, I highly recommend it. And it was made into a very good film with creatures and visual effects by Ray Harryhausen, the great Ray Harryhausen. And if you don't know who that is, run and see his films, Jason and the Argonauts, Seventh Voyage of Sinbad, Golden Voyage of Sinbad, Clash of the Titans, on and on. I mean, he was the master of stop motion animation. But more than that, he chose the subject matter. He loved, he was teenage friends with Ray Bradbury, lifelong friends, though I worked with both of them, interestingly enough. And but Harryhausen said to me, Ray always liked the future while I always preferred the past. And so his films often go into mythological stories from the Greek mythology, from antiquity, but every now and then he would do a futuristic science fiction story like First Man in the Moon, and it's really totally delightful. What else do we have in here? This is The World Below by S. Fowler Wright, an early science fiction writer. And again, one of the fun things about these books, this is from I think 1929, is the person who owned this book way back when cut out the cover and put it inside the book so it would be protected. So it's very neat. Inside is also a description of, this was just £10, which is about maybe $12, and they describe the book. So they say, The World Below, Books for Today, London, that's the publisher, 1929. First edition, second impression, Books for Today, London, 1929. Spine slightly sunned with ends slightly rubbed. Lacks front free end paper. So, you know, they tell you what's what with the individual copy of the book, but I really love this. So, and sometimes on a book you'll have a signature of the owner, or you might have ads for other books in the back. It just, books, you know, individual books have a personality, and I love that personality. I'm not looking for perfect copies where you don't have a feeling anyone before you ever owned them. Now, I've said before that one of my favorite movies is Things to Come by H.G. Wells, 1936. It predicted the Blitz on London. It's huge in scope. It was directed by William Cameron Menzies, who was one of the great production designers of movies, including both versions of Thief of Baghdad, the Douglas Fairbanks and the later one. He designed Gone with the Wind and the visuals, and directed Invaders from Mars, the 1950s movie, brilliant visual sense. And Things to Come is his biggest and perhaps greatest film. Certainly one of the great films of science fiction. H.G. Wells hated the movie Metropolis. He didn't like what it stood for, so he wrote his view of what the future would be. And then he published it, even before the movie came out, he published what essentially was his film script, which has many scenes that are not in the movie. Now, on Mr. Sci-Fi, I posted this entire movie. You can watch it. If you just go to the subject line of Mr. Sci-Fi and type in Things to Come, it should come right up. It's a wonderful film. It stars Raymond Massey and playing his the character of Cabal and his grandson. So he plays two characters over a 100-year period. I think the movie starts in 1939, 36, and then it goes to 1936, and then it goes to 2036. But the fun part about this edition, because I have this book in several copies, is that the person who owned it was a fan of the movie that really clipped out pictures from the movie, articles about the movie, and put them in this copy. So, which it's really quite wonderful, because as you flip through it, you find all sorts of really cool stuff. Like, for instance, let's see if I can pull it out here. Yeah, like there's articles. This is an article about the movie that shows the space gun, and if you look over here, you can see that's the climactic end scene of the movie. And then throughout the book, as there's scenes, there's the wandering sickness. It's like, let's see, there's just bunches of stuff throughout this book where he's very carefully inserted, photos from the movie. And so it's a unique copy, very lovingly crafted. And at the end, there's actually an article about part of the movie that's describing part of the movie. And it's just very, very neat that he did this and went to all this time and trouble. And so it's cool. It's a very personal edition, a unique edition of this book. And also Elaine and I, there was a whole subplot with Oswald Cabal's, the grandson's wife, and it was cut out of the movie. And so Elaine and I actually reenacted that scene using stills from the sequence that was cut. And so that was really fun. And that role was played by the same actress who played the earlier concubine to the boss, played by Ralph Richardson. And so she had a dual role in it, but only one of the two roles survived. Interestingly enough, Ernest Thesiger, who played Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein, brilliant actor, he was originally the villain in Things to Come, and then H.G. Wells didn't like his performance, thought it was too gay, quote unquote, and insisted they recast. And so, but they didn't tell Ernest Thesiger, so he showed up at the premiere with a bunch of his friends to see his performance and was stunned that he was no longer in the movie. And but I actually have photos of him in that role. I have one of them on my wall at home. So pretty interesting story. I would have loved to have seen him in the role. He was really a wonderful actor, despite what Wells might have thought of him. So here we go. So here's a few more books. This is another great Clifford Simak book. They walked like men. Great. The aliens wouldn't kill. They'd take over Earth and let man survive if he could. It looks like this cover is by Richard Powers. The two really great cover artists of science fiction books in the 50s and early 60s were Ed Emshwiller, who was very realistic in his painting, and Richard Powers, who took a much more abstract approach. But they were both good and had just an astonishing output. So let's see, what else do we have in here? Here's another book that's got a great cover. No Place Like Earth. And this is a collection of novellas by John Wyndham and John Christopher and Arthur C. Clarke, all British writers. But it's just like, wow, that's literally eye-catching. So very, very fun. Now, this is another ace double with two covers by Ed Emshwiller, No Man's World on one side, and on the other side, Mayday Orbit by Poul Anderson. And again, it's just a very fun fun painting of this guy putting graffiti onto an ancient alien obelisk. So, and then I got this. It's Storm Track. This is Harlan Ellison briefly had a series of books published by Pyramid called the Harlan Ellison Discovery Series, where he would introduce new authors. And this is one of them, Storm Track by James Sutherland, and it's got a very fun introduction by Harlan, who of course was one of my friends and mentors. And this is one of Harlan's favorite artists, an artist named Tim Kirk, who illustrated Tolkien and many other things. But he had a very kind of cartoony, fun, very unique and whimsical style, and I like this cover. And so I grabbed that because I didn't have a copy. Then here's another, again, I got this just for the cover. It's John Carstairs' Space Detective by Frank Belknap Long, who was, again, a well-known science fiction writer of his era. And as you can see, this predates Little Shop of Horrors, but it's a woman being about to be eaten by a giant plant. And boy, there's nothing wrong with that, certainly. And if you hear music in the background, that's because there was a wedding at where we're staying at the Swan Inn, and that's the band. Now, one thing that's also very fun about science fiction books in England is that they often would take covers from other titles and put them on completely different books. So this painting, which is, I think, my favorite painting by Ed M. Schwiller, was used for a book by Harlan Ellison, and I think it was The Man with Nine Lives, and here it is on a book by Murray Leinster. So the cover has absolutely nothing to do with this book, which is The BrainStealers. Murray Leinster was a well-known science fiction author of this era. His real name was Will Jenkins, so I'm not quite sure why he changed it to Murray Leinster, but there you go. So let's see what else we have in here. A few more titles, a few more books. Okay. So John Christopher is a writer who did a very successful series of books called The Tripods, which was very similar to the Walking Machines in War of the Worlds, and it was made into a successful TV show and a successful, I think, quadrilogy of books. But he also wrote these books where something terrible would happen to the weather and Earth would be challenged. In this one, there's a new ice age. So this is called The World in Winter, and another Penguin book. And then this is yet another After the Bomb story this is by Pat Frank, and it's The Last Babylon. It's about how people come together to help each other after the World War. And you have to remember that during the 50s and 60s, people really did expect there to be an atomic war, a nuclear war that would destroy the world. For the first time in the history of mankind had the power to destroy the planet. And yet it was all in the hands of the Russians and the Americans, basically. And they were being very belligerent toward each other, and so people were very afraid, living in constant fear. Here's another Murray Leinster book. I like the cover. I think it's probably a Richard Powers cover. Creatures from the Abyss. So that's pretty cool. It's about weird fish and being discovered. And this is another one I just got because the cover is so great. Rogue Queen. That's by L. Sprague de Camp, who was another one of the writers of that era and could write very entertainingly. This is Philip Jose Farmer, Blown. Now, Philip Jose Farmer came to fame with the Riverworld series. His first novel in the Riverworld series was To Your Scattered Bodies Go, which was the idea that everyone who's ever lived on Earth wakes up in a new body on an alien planet that consists of a river that goes around the entire planet, and they have no idea why they've been resuscitated, revived, reincarnated. And so some of the characters include the reincarnated Richard Francis Burton, not Richard Burton the actor, but Richard Francis Burton, who was one of the great explorers of the 19th century and an adventurer and a daring man. And one of the others is Hermann Goering. One of the villains is Hermann Goering, the great head of the Luftwaffe during World War II under Hitler. But this book, Blown, this history on this is Ted Sturgeon, the great Theodore Sturgeon, who was a friend and mentor of mine, told me that there was a period, I think it was in the 60s, when a publisher of pornographic novels approached many of the most successful science fiction writers and offered them the opportunity to write pornographic novels, and they could either do it under a pseudonym or under their own name. And so some, like Robert Silverberg and Harlan Ellison, wrote pseudonymously and just took the paycheck, and others wrote under their own names, such as Philip Jose Farmer. Now, I don't know if this was ever published as a porn novel, but it was certainly written for that purpose. And Theodore Sturgeon wrote a book called God Body that he did not finish in time to be published by the porn publisher, but ultimately that was his last book, and it was published, I think, posthumously, but he was very proud of it because it was, he was not just writing crap to write crap and get paid, nor was Philip Jose Farmer. So he wrote The Image of the Beast and Blown were those two of his erotic novels, but he's a very, very solid writer and a very interesting writer. So then also, mentioning Philip Jose Farmer, he was a huge fan of both Tarzan and Doc Savage, another pulp hero, and so he came up with his own versions of Tarzan and Doc Savage, the Man of Bronze, and so he wrote them under different character names, but Doc Caliban and the Lord of the Trees, and that's his take on this stuff. Now, finally, we have, and again, as I said, this is not all of the books I bought. This is merely a small. These are merely the ones I haven't shipped out yet, and this is the hardcover edition of West of the Sun by Edgar Pangborn. He's a very good writer. He also wrote A Mirror for Observers, and it's just Planet of the, and it's just a fun cover, as you can see, and it's a very neat book. None of these books were more than a few dollars. £7, £10, £3. Some of them, none of this stuff is going to break the bank, and so. But this one just had. I liked it a lot. And I like Pangborn as a writer, and then on the back is an ad for Planet of the Dreamers by John D. MacDonald. Now, John D. MacDonald wrote the Travis McGee detective books. He's a wonderful writer. If you've never read the Travis McGee books, search them out. He also wrote the novel that the movie Cape Fear was made from, and there are two great versions of that. One was done with Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum, and the other was done with Martin. It was done with what's his name? Robert De Niro, and they're both very effective and very scary. So, but that's the group. So tomorrow's my last day to go through the bookstores here in Hay-on-Wye, and I'll be going through more stacks, maybe sharing with you the book haul. I also did a video where I was in the one of the science fiction rooms in one of these great bookstores, but it's great fun because again, in some of these cases, it's writers that I knew personally, like Harlan Ellison, or these, and others, it's people who I've read since I was a kid, and it's like old home week for me. So that's it for now. Don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Sci-Fi. Tell your friends. We want to keep going. As I say, we've been demonetized, so please, if you want to help make that not happen, because that's a shame, that'd be great. And but subscribe, comment, ding the bell. Do all the stuff you're supposed to do, and if you're interested in supporting Space Command or the other 5 pilots and feature we're doing, just email me at markzickrey@gmail.com. I'm happy to send you the information. Shares are $7,500 each, so you don't have to be a gazillionaire to invest and get a portion of my profits in these amazing projects. In fact, I'm about to send out. I got a royalty check for the first royalty check, essentially, on Space Command, and it's not millions yet, but it's enough so I can write checks to my investors, and I'll be getting money, and that'll maybe help them for Christmas. So that's about it. So thanks a lot, and we'll talk real soon. Bye, guys.